It was a quiet evening on Earth, the kind where the sky was clear, and the stars twinkled like tiny diamonds scattered across the heavens. Ethan was just an ordinary guy, taking a break from the busy city life to enjoy some peace in the woods. He'd set up his tent near a small clearing, his backpack resting beside him as he relaxed on a comfortable fold-out chair. The world was peaceful, and the only sounds were the occasional chirping of crickets and the rustling of leaves in the cool breeze. Ethan had always loved camping. It gave him a sense of calm, a chance to escape the noise of his hectic everyday life. He had no idea that this night would be different, no idea that his life was about to change forever. As the night deepened, a strange hum filled the air. Ethan's ears perked up, and he looked around, unsure of what was happening. It was unlike anything he'd heard before. At first, he thought it might be a trick of the wind, but the sound grew louder, almost like a low, vibrating buzz that seemed to come from above. Suddenly, the trees around him lit up with an intense glow, as if the stars themselves had descended to the earth. Ethan jumped to his feet, his heart racing. He wasn't sure what was happening, but instinct told him this was no ordinary occurrence. The light became brighter, and within moments, a huge object appeared in the sky. It was unlike anything he had ever seen. An enormous ship, shaped like a disc, with a smooth metallic surface that shimmered as it floated silently through the air. The hum intensified, vibrating through the ground beneath his feet, and Ethan's breath caught in his throat. It hovered just above the trees, casting a strange blue light over the entire clearing. Ethan stood frozen, staring up at the ship. His mind raced, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. Could this be some sort of military aircraft? A drone? Or was this something else entirely? Before he could make a move, the ship began to lower. Slowly, it descended, touching down softly in the clearing just a few yards away. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as he took a cautious step back. Was it an alien ship? Was he about to be part of some government experiment? Or something even stranger? The ship's surface rippled, and then a section of the craft opened. A ramp extended, and a figure appeared. She was tall, graceful, and unlike any person he had ever seen. Her skin glowed softly, a silvery blue hue that shimmered in the moonlight. Her eyes were large and dark, with an intensity that felt both alien and familiar at the same time. She wore a strange outfit that seemed to be made of flowing fabric, something that looked like it came straight out of a science fiction movie. Ethan's mouth went dry. He couldn't move. He was both terrified and fascinated at the same time. Was this really happening? The figure's gaze locked onto Ethan. Without a word, she stepped forward, and the ground beneath her seemed to bend slightly, as if she was moving through a different space altogether. There was a calmness about her, a kind of quiet strength that radiated from her very being. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was smooth, melodic, yet with a sense of urgency. "I need you," she said simply. Ethan's mind raced. "You need me? What do you mean?" The alien woman's eyes never wavered. She took another step closer, her presence so commanding that Ethan felt as if he were being pulled toward her, despite himself. "You are the one," she said, her voice calm and direct. "The one who can help, the one who can make a difference." Ethan's heart was still racing, his mind struggling to process everything. He didn't know how to respond. Was this some kind of dream? Had he lost his mind? He was just a regular guy, not some kind of hero. Why would she need him? But before he could ask any more questions, she reached out, her hand glowing faintly, and a strange energy washed over him. Ethan tried to step back, but he felt his body freeze, as if an invisible force was holding him in place. The air around him seemed to shift. The trees around the clearing began to blur, the sounds of the world fading into a distant hum. The woman's voice came again, not from her lips, but in his mind. "You cannot escape this, Ethan. It is fate," she said. "You will come with me." Ethan opened his mouth to protest, but before he could say anything, a flash of light surrounded him. He felt himself lifted off the ground, his body weightless. He saw the ground fall away beneath him as if gravity itself had ceased to exist. Panic surged through him, but he couldn't move. The world around him twisted, and in an instant, everything went dark. When Ethan opened his eyes again, he was no longer standing in the woods. He was aboard the strange ship, surrounded by soft, glowing light. The air smelled different, clean, like the faint scent of ozone after a thunderstorm. The woman stood before him, her eyes gentle now, but still filled with purpose. "You're safe," she said, "for now." Ethan's mouth went dry as he looked around. The walls of the ship were smooth and metallic, and there were strange symbols glowing faintly along the panels. He was trapped, but there was no use in trying to escape. "Who are you?" Ethan asked, his voice shaking. The woman's gaze softened. "I am Lyra," she said, "and you, Ethan, are the only one who can help us." Ethan took a deep breath. There was no turning back now. The adventure of a lifetime was beginning, whether he was ready for it or not. Ethan blinked, still trying to make sense of everything. One moment he was camping in the woods, and the next he was standing inside a strange ship in the presence of an alien woman named Lyra. The walls of the ship were smooth, metallic, and faintly glowing, giving off a soft blue light. Everything around him felt foreign, unfamiliar, and yet there was something oddly calming about it. Ethan looked at Lyra, trying to find the right words. "Why did you bring me here? What do you want from me?" he asked, his voice still shaky but filled with a mix of curiosity and confusion. Lyra's dark eyes softened, and she took a step closer to him, her voice calm but filled with purpose. "I didn't bring you here by choice, Ethan. I was sent to find you. You are special." Ethan frowned. "Special? I'm just a guy. What could I possibly have that's special?" He ran a hand through his hair, feeling frustrated. "I don't even understand what's going on. I don't belong here." Lyra gave a small, understanding smile. "You don't belong here, but your destiny is tied to something far greater than you could ever imagine." She paused, letting her words sink in. "I need you because you have something no one else has, something that can help save my people." "Your people?" Ethan repeated, still trying to wrap his head around the situation. "You mean you're not from Earth?" Lyra shook her head. "No, I am not from Earth. I come from a planet called Australia, far beyond your galaxy." Her voice grew darker. "My people are in danger. We've been oppressed by a cruel empire for generations. Our world is dying, and we are being forced to serve a power we cannot defeat." Ethan listened intently, his eyes narrowing as he processed her words. "An empire? What kind of empire?" he asked, feeling the tension in the air. Lyra's expression became grim. "The empire is called the Zoreth Collective. They conquer worlds, enslave races, and destroy anyone who resists. They have powerful technology that controls minds. They can take over the will of an entire population with ease, and they have done this to my people." Her voice trembled slightly, but she quickly regained her composure. "We've been fighting for years, but we cannot win. Not without help." Ethan felt a cold shiver run down his spine. He had heard of stories of galactic empires and powerful alien forces in science fiction movies, but he never imagined that something like this could be real. Yet, standing in front of him was a living, breathing alien who was asking for his help. "You want me to help you fight them?" Ethan asked, his voice uncertain. "But I don't know anything about fighting. I'm not some soldier. I'm just a guy who likes to go camping." Lyra nodded, her eyes full of conviction. "I understand your hesitation, but it's not about fighting the way you think. The Zoreth Collective has a technology that can control minds, but there's something about humans that makes us resistant to their influence." She paused, giving Ethan a moment to process. "You have a power within you that no one else in the galaxy has. The Zoreth cannot control you, and that is why you are the key." Ethan shook his head, still not understanding. I'm not special. I'm just normal. How could I possibly have anything that can stop this empire? He felt like he was going crazy. All of this sounded like something out of a movie, not something that could happen to him. Lyra took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. The Zoreth Collective uses mind control technology to enslave entire populations. They have conquered planet after planet, spreading fear and suffering. But there is something about humans, something deep inside you, that they cannot manipulate. Your minds are free. They are unpredictable. And that unpredictability is the key to stopping them. Ethan looked at her, trying to make sense of what she was saying. So, you're telling me that I can resist this mind control thing? Yes, Lyra said firmly. And not only that, you can learn to use this resistance to break their control over others. Your mind, Ethan, is unlike anything the Zoreth have encountered. Ethan felt overwhelmed. He had always thought of himself as an average guy, just trying to make it through life. Now he was standing in a spaceship, talking to an alien who was telling him he had the power to change the fate of an entire planet. It was too much to take in. Lyra seemed to sense his confusion and offered him a reassuring smile. You don't have to believe it all at once, but I need you to trust me. We don't have much time. Ethan took a deep breath, looking at her with uncertainty. What do you need me to do? Lyra's eyes shone with a mix of hope and desperation. You'll need to train, to learn how to control the power within you. The Zoreth are coming for us, and we need to act before it's too late. But I can't do this alone. I need you to stand with me, Ethan. Together, we can defeat them. For the first time since all of this started, Ethan felt a spark of determination deep within him. Maybe he wasn't just an average guy. Maybe there was something more to him than he realized. As much as he didn't understand everything, something inside him told him that this was real, that this was happening. He looked at Lyra, her eyes full of hope, and nodded slowly. All right. I'll help you. I don't know how, but I'll do my best. Lyra's face softened with gratitude, and she stepped closer. Thank you, Ethan. Your courage will make all the difference. As the ship continued its journey through the stars, Ethan realized that his life had just taken a turn into the unknown. But he also knew one thing for sure. Whatever came next, he wasn't going to back down. The days aboard Lyra's ship passed in a blur for Ethan. He had no idea how much time had passed since his strange abduction from the forest, but he had quickly realized that his life was never going to be the same. He was far from Earth now, floating among the stars, and his reality had been turned upside down. But despite the confusion, something inside him told him he was where he was supposed to be. Lyra had told him that he was the key to saving her people. His mind, his ability to resist the Zoreth Collective's control, was unlike anything they had encountered. And though Ethan didn't believe in destiny, part of him felt a strange, almost overwhelming sense of responsibility. He had been chosen. There had to be a reason. However, that didn't mean he was ready. Not by a long shot. Lyra was a patient teacher, but she didn't hold back. Every day, she trained him in the ways of controlling his mind. She taught him how to focus, how to harness the strange power within him, and how to push against the mental chains that the Zoreth could throw at him. You are not just fighting with your body, she explained during one of their first training sessions. You must fight with your mind. The Zoreth use their technology to control thoughts, to make beings obey without question. But you have a power they cannot touch. Your mind is free. Ethan stared at her, still struggling to believe what she was saying. How could he, a regular guy, have this incredible power? How could he possibly be the one to stop a galactic empire? Lyra didn't answer his unspoken questions. She simply guided him, day by day, through exercises that tested his limits. Some were simple, like meditation and breathing exercises to clear his mind. Others were more difficult, like learning how to manipulate energy fields with his thoughts. Ethan was amazed at what he could do when he focused hard enough. It was like there was a force within him, just waiting to be unlocked. But despite his progress, he felt frustrated. The power Lyra spoke of wasn't easy to access, and there were moments when he felt completely powerless. Sometimes, when the ship's artificial gravity was turned off during their training, Ethan would float helplessly in the air, unable to control the energy Lyra said was inside him. "You need to trust yourself more," Lyra would say gently. "The Zoreth will not go easy on you. You cannot doubt yourself." Ethan would nod, but inside, doubt was all he could feel. How could he ever be ready to face the Zoreth? They were a ruthless empire, and he was just one person, a person who had never been trained for anything like this. Then, one morning, after several weeks of intense training, something changed. Lyra led him into a large, empty chamber aboard the ship, one that had been designed for physical and mental challenges. The walls were lined with strange, glowing symbols, and the air hummed with a low, vibrating energy. "This is the final test, Ethan," Lyra said, her voice serious. "The time is coming when we will have to face the Zoreth head-on. I need to know if you're truly ready." Ethan felt his heart race. This was it. He had no idea what kind of test Lyra was talking about, but he had a feeling it was going to be harder than anything he had faced so far. "You will face an illusion," Lyra explained. "It will feel real, but it is only in your mind. The goal is to resist it, to stay focused and not allow it to break you." Ethan swallowed hard, his palms sweating. "An illusion? What kind of illusion?" "You'll see soon enough," Lyra said cryptically. She motioned for him to step into the center of the room. "Are you ready?" Ethan took a deep breath, trying to calm his nerves. He nodded. "I'm ready." Lyra raised her hand, and the room seemed to shift. The walls around him blurred, and the air seemed to grow thick with tension. Suddenly, Ethan found himself standing in the middle of a battlefield. The sounds of distant explosions filled his ears, and the sky above him was dark, filled with thick clouds of smoke. For a moment, Ethan froze. The sight before him was terrifying. He was surrounded by soldiers, Zoreth soldiers, all wearing dark armor and carrying weapons that glowed with a strange alien energy. He could hear their voices in the distance, shouting orders in a language he couldn't understand. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. This wasn't real, he reminded himself. This was just an illusion. But the fear in his chest felt real. "Focus," Lyra's voice echoed in his mind. "Don't let it control you. You have the power to break free." Ethan clenched his fists, trying to steady his breath. He could feel the heat from the explosions, smell the smoke in the air. Everything seemed real, too real. The illusion began to shift again. He was no longer standing alone on the battlefield. Now, there were people around him, his family, his friends. They were all looking at him with fear in their eyes, urging him to run, to escape the danger, but he couldn't move. The fear was overwhelming. "Ethan, you are not your past," Lyra's voice whispered in his mind. "You are the present. You are the future. The Zoreth cannot control you." Ethan's mind began to clear. The image of his friends and family faded, and the sounds of the battlefield grew distant. Slowly, he began to realize that none of this was real. It was all in his head. He had the power to control it. He focused, pushing the fear away, clearing his thoughts. The battlefield began to dissolve, and the Zoreth soldiers vanished. The smoke cleared, and soon he was standing alone in the empty chamber again. Lyra stood before him, watching with a proud smile on her face. "Well done, Ethan," she said softly. "You passed the test." Ethan took a deep breath, his body trembling from the intensity of the experience. He had done it. He had resisted the illusion. He wasn't ready to fight the Zoreth yet, but for the first time, he felt like he might have a chance. "You've come a long way," Lyra said, "but there is much more to learn. The real challenge is still ahead." Ethan nodded, a spark of determination in his eyes. "I'm ready." Ethan stood at the window of the ship, looking out into the vast emptiness of space. The stars twinkled like tiny pinpricks of light, and the endless black stretched out before him, both beautiful and terrifying. He had spent weeks training, learning to control his mind, and now he was preparing for something even more dangerous, the first real test of his abilities. Lyra had told him that the Zorath Collective was closing in on them. They had tracked her ship's movements, and it was only a matter of time before they attacked. Ethan could feel the weight of what was about to happen. He was no longer just a camper from Earth. He was part of something bigger now, and there was no turning back. "We're approaching the planet." Lyra's voice broke through his thoughts. He turned around to see her standing in the doorway, her expression serious but calm. "Get ready." Ethan nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. "How bad is it?" Lyra's eyes softened, but the worry in them was clear. "The Zorath will come in full force. They won't hold back. This is our only chance to strike before they overwhelm us." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. He had been preparing for this moment in his mind, but nothing could have truly prepared him for the reality of it. He was about to face the Zorath, an empire that had crushed countless civilizations, and he, Ethan, a man with no military training, was supposed to be the key to their defeat. "Do you think I'm ready?" he asked, his voice shaking slightly. Lyra stepped closer, her eyes full of quiet confidence. "You're more ready than you think. You have the power within you, Ethan. Now, it's time to use it." Before he could say anything else, the ship shook violently, throwing him off balance. He grabbed onto the nearest console, trying to steady himself. The alarms blared, and the lights in the ship flickered. "They found us," Lyra said urgently. "Get to the cockpit. Now." Ethan followed her quickly down the narrow hallways of the ship, his heart racing. As they reached the cockpit, he saw the view screen showing a fleet of ships in the distance. The Zorath fleet was enormous, their ships dark and sleek, with sharp edges that looked like they could cut through the stars themselves. Ethan swallowed hard. "Are we outmatched?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lyra didn't answer right away. She quickly tapped a few buttons, and the ship's defense systems powered up. "We are outnumbered, but not outmatched," she replied. "I've trained you for this moment. You don't need to be a soldier, you need to be yourself. Trust your instincts." Ethan nodded, trying to calm his nerves. He could do this. He had to. The Zorath wouldn't stop until they had crushed everything in their path. But he wasn't just going to sit back and let them win. "Here they come," Lyra warned. The Zorath ships were closing in fast. "Prepare for battle." The ship shuddered again as the first blast hit them. The force threw Ethan against the seat, but he quickly recovered. Lyra's fingers flew over the controls as she navigated the ship through a series of evasive maneuvers. The Zorath ships were fast and powerful, but Lyra's ship was smaller and more agile, giving them a slight edge. "They're targeting our engines," Lyra said, her voice steady but urgent. "If they hit us there, we won't be able to escape." Ethan's heart raced. "What can I do?" Lyra's eyes met his. "Use your power, focus your mind, and stop their attacks." Ethan took a deep breath, trying to clear his thoughts. He had practiced for moments like this, but now that it was real, it was harder than he thought. The fear was creeping in, threatening to take control. He had to push it away. He had to focus. He closed his eyes, letting the sounds of the battle fade into the background. He could feel the ship's energy vibrating beneath him, the hum of its systems, the pulse of the Zorath's attacks. He reached out with his mind, letting the power Lyra had helped him uncover rise to the surface. For a moment, he felt nothing. Then, like a wave, the energy surged through him, and he felt a deep connection with the ship. It was like a part of him, alive and responsive to his every thought. He could feel the Zorath's attacks before they even hit, like a shadow moving toward them. With a focused thought, he pushed back. The ship's shields flared to life, glowing a brilliant blue as they absorbed the incoming blasts. Ethan's mind was now in sync with the ship's systems. He could feel the heat of the blasts, the power of the energy striking their shields, but he held firm, refusing to let the Zoreth break through. Lyra glanced at him, her eyes wide with surprise. "You're doing it, Ethan. Keep going." Ethan nodded, focusing even harder. He could feel the Zoreth ship's movements now, almost like an extension of his own senses. He could anticipate their attacks, deflecting them before they even reached the ship. It was like he could see the future, just for a split second, enough to make a difference. Then, just as quickly as it had started, the attack stopped. The Zoreth ships began to pull back, their weapons powered down. Ethan let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "What happened?" he asked, still trembling from the intensity of the battle. Lyra looked at the screen, her eyes narrowing. "They're retreating. They've realized that they can't break through our defenses." "You did it, Ethan. You stopped them." Ethan slumped back in his seat, exhausted but relieved. He couldn't believe it. He had actually done it. He had used his power to protect the ship, to stop the Zoreth from attacking. Lyra turned to him with a proud smile. "You are ready, Ethan. This is just the beginning." Ethan looked out at the stars, his mind racing with everything that had just happened. The battle wasn't over, not by a long shot. But for the first time, he felt like maybe, just maybe, he could make a difference. The aftermath of the battle left the ship in a tense silence. The Zoreth fleet had retreated, but no one was celebrating. The threat was far from over. Ethan sat in the cockpit next to Lyra, his hands still trembling slightly from the strain of using his powers. He had never imagined that he could do something like that, stop an attack with nothing but his mind. But now, more than ever, he realized just how dangerous the Zoreth were. "They've backed off for now," Lyra said quietly, her fingers moving over the controls. "But they'll be back. And next time, they won't make the same mistake." Ethan nodded, trying to calm his racing thoughts. "How long do we have before they come after us again?" Lyra's expression was serious. "I don't know. The Zoreth are relentless. They don't give up easily. But we've bought ourselves some time. That's all we can do, prepare for the next fight." Ethan leaned back in his seat, running a hand through his hair. He hadn't signed up for this. He had never asked for any of this. But now that he was in it, there was no turning back. He was part of something bigger than himself, and the weight of that responsibility was beginning to sink in. "How do we prepare for the next fight?" he asked, looking at Lyra. Lyra met his gaze. "We train. We gather allies. And we learn everything we can about the Zoreth. Knowledge is our greatest weapon." Ethan thought about what she said. Knowledge. It made sense. The more they knew about their enemies, the better they could defend themselves. But there was so much they didn't know, so much that was still a mystery. How could they fight an empire that had already conquered so many worlds? How could they defeat an enemy that seemed so powerful? "We need to find out where they're coming from," Ethan said, his voice growing more determined. "If we can figure that out, maybe we can stop them before they can launch another attack." Lyra smiled at him, a small but approving smile. "That's exactly what I was thinking. We need to find their main base, their headquarters. If we can infiltrate it and gather information, we'll have the advantage." Ethan's mind raced with the possibilities. If they could find the Zoreth's central command, they could learn their weaknesses, their plans, everything they needed to know to stop them. But the thought of infiltrating the heart of such a powerful empire was daunting. It was like walking straight into the lion's den. "How do we even find their base?" Ethan asked. Lyra turned back to the controls, her fingers working quickly. "We've intercepted some communications from their ships. It's not much, but it's a start. There's a planet on the edge of their territory that seems to be a supply hub. If we can get there, we might be able to gather more information about where they're operating from." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "A supply hub. That sounds like a good place to start." Lyra nodded. "It's a risk, but we don't have many options. We'll need to be quick, quiet, and careful. The Zoreth have eyes everywhere." The ship jumped to hyperspace, the stars stretching into streaks of light as they traveled at incredible speeds. The journey felt long and tense, the quiet between them filled with unspoken thoughts. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was coming, that the Zorath weren't just a military threat, but something far more dangerous. As they approached the planet, Lyra's voice cut through his thoughts. "Get ready, Ethan. This is going to be dangerous. We'll need to move fast and stay hidden." Ethan nodded. "I understand. Let's do this." The ship descended through the atmosphere, its stealth systems masking their presence from any sensors that might be watching. The planet below was a barren wasteland, its surface scarred by centuries of neglect. In the distance, Ethan could see massive industrial complexes, factories, and warehouses, perfect for hiding in plain sight. As they touched down in a secluded area, Lyra activated the ship's cloaking device, making it invisible to anyone who might be looking. She turned to Ethan, her face serious. "This is it. We go in, we gather intel, and we get out. No heroics, no unnecessary risks." Ethan nodded, the weight of the mission settling over him. They were doing this for Lyra's people, for everyone the Zorath had enslaved. He couldn't back down now. Not when he knew the stakes. They moved through the desolate landscape, sticking to the shadows. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as they approached the nearest warehouse. The air smelled of rust and metal, and the ground was cracked and dry beneath his boots. He could hear the faint hum of machinery in the distance, and he knew that every step they took brought them closer to danger. "This way," Lyra whispered, leading him to the side of the building. They found an access door, and Lyra quickly disabled the security system, allowing them to slip inside unnoticed. The interior of the warehouse was dark, the only light coming from overhead flickering lights. Rows of crates and storage containers were stacked high, filled with supplies and equipment. Lyra moved swiftly, her eyes scanning the room for anything useful. Ethan followed closely behind her, his senses heightened. Every creak of the floor, every whisper of movement made him jump. He knew that at any moment, they could be discovered. He had to stay focused. "There," Lyra whispered, pointing to a terminal in the far corner of the room. "We need to access that." They crept toward it, and Lyra quickly got to work, her fingers flying over the keys. Ethan kept watch, his eyes darting around the room. His mind kept going back to the Zorath, their overwhelming power, their seemingly unstoppable reach. But as Lyra worked, he realized something. The Zorath were not invincible. They had weaknesses, and maybe, just maybe, they could be defeated. Suddenly, a loud noise echoed through the building, causing Ethan's heart to race. They had been found. "Lyra," Ethan hissed, "we need to go, now." Lyra didn't hesitate. She slammed her hand down on the terminal, downloading the data they had gathered. Then, without a word, she grabbed Ethan's arm, pulling him toward the exit. The chase had begun. The sound of footsteps echoed in the warehouse, growing louder with each passing second. Ethan's heart raced, his breath coming in quick, shallow bursts. Lyra was already ahead, her movements fluid and practiced as she pulled him toward the exit. But Ethan's mind was spinning. They had been discovered. There was no time to think, no time to plan. "Stay close," Lyra hissed, her grip tightening on his arm as they sprinted through the maze of crates and machinery. "We can't afford to get caught." Ethan didn't need to be told twice. His legs burned as they ran, his every instinct screaming at him to stay with Lyra. They had come too far to fail now. The data they had stolen from the terminal was important, critical even, but it would mean nothing if they didn't make it out alive. The warehouse was vast, with dark corners and long, shadowed aisles, making it hard to tell where the guards were coming from. Lyra led him through the shadows, staying low to the ground, her movements almost invisible in the dim light. But Ethan's pulse was hammering in his ears, making it hard to focus. He couldn't stop thinking about the danger they were in. The Zorath were relentless, and they wouldn't stop until they had captured them. They reached the back of the warehouse, where a small, unguarded door led outside. Lyra paused for a moment, checking the area for any signs of movement. When she was certain it was clear, she motioned for Ethan to follow her. They slipped through the door and into the open air. The planet's barren landscape stretched out before them, the ground cracked and dry, with no sign of life in sight. The ship was still cloaked, hidden from view, but it felt like an eternity before they could reach it. Every step was filled with the heavy weight of uncertainty. Would the Zoreth be waiting for them outside? Was it a trap? As they moved quickly across the rocky ground, Lyra suddenly stopped. Ethan almost bumped into her. "What is it?" he whispered. Lyra raised a hand, signaling for him to be silent. Her eyes scanned the horizon, every muscle in her body tense with alertness. Ethan followed her gaze and saw nothing but the endless expanse of the wasteland. But then he saw it, a dark shape moving in the distance. It was hard to make out, but it was definitely approaching. "The Zoreth," Lyra muttered under her breath. "They're closing in on us. We need to move now." Without waiting for a response, she grabbed Ethan's hand and pulled him into a sprint. The ship wasn't far, but it might as well have been miles away with the way the Zoreth ships were approaching. Ethan could hear the faint whine of engines in the distance. They were being hunted. They reached the ship's landing site just as the first Zoreth ship appeared on the horizon, a massive dark craft that seemed to swallow the light around it. Lyra wasted no time, rushing toward the ship's entrance and activating the controls. The hatch slid open, and they both scrambled inside. "Move," Lyra barked, shoving Ethan toward the controls. "Get us out of here." Ethan's mind raced. He had never flown a ship before, let alone one as advanced as Lyra's. But there was no time to panic. He couldn't let fear take control. His hand shook as he sat down at the controls, quickly scanning the dashboard for any clues on how to operate the ship. Lyra's voice guided him, steady and calm despite the urgency of the situation. "Activate the engines. Thrust controls are on your left. Use them gently." Ethan nodded, trying to ignore the panic building inside him. His hands moved automatically, pressing buttons and pulling levers. The engines roared to life, vibrating beneath him as the ship began to lift off the ground. The Zoreth ship was getting closer, its massive shape growing larger in the viewport. "Faster," Lyra urged, her voice tight with tension. Ethan pushed the controls forward, and the ship shot upward, leaving the surface of E planet behind. The stars outside the viewport blurred as they rocketed into space, but the threat of the Zoreth fleet still loomed large. He could feel his chest tightening as they sped away, the ship's engines screaming as they pushed the vessel to its limits. "Get us into hyperspace," Lyra said. "Now." Ethan wasn't sure how to do it, but he remembered Lyra's earlier instructions. He reached for a set of controls, hoping they would work. The Zoreth ship was closing in fast. The danger was real. With a burst of adrenaline, Ethan engaged the hyperspace drive. The stars outside the windows stretched into bright lines as the ship leaped forward into faster-than-light travel. They were safe for now, but only just. The Zoreth would track them, but for the moment, they had escaped. Ethan slumped back in his seat, gasping for air. His heart was still racing from the narrow escape. The sense of danger was still heavy in the air, but for the first time since they had entered the planet's atmosphere, he felt like they had gained some ground. Lyra sat across from him, her face hard but relieved. She glanced at the datapad in her hands, reviewing the information they had gathered from the terminal. There was no time to celebrate. They still had a long way to go, and the Zoreth would not stop until they were found. Ethan watched her for a moment, then looked back at the stars outside the window. The Zoreth were powerful, yes, but they had just proven that they weren't invincible. They had a chance, however small it might be, to fight back. Ethan wasn't sure how they were going to defeat the Zoreth, but he knew this. He wasn't going to let them take his new friends. He wasn't going to let them win. "Where do we go now?" he asked quietly. Lyra looked up from the datapad, her eyes meeting his with a mixture of determination and hope. "We gather allies. We fight back. and we make them pay for everything they've taken." Ethan nodded, his resolve hardening. The fight wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. The journey through the stars was quiet, but the weight of the mission pressed down on both Lyra and Ethan. The ship's engines hummed steadily beneath them as they traveled toward their next destination, a hidden rebel base located in a remote part of the galaxy. The data they had stolen from the Zorath supply hub was crucial, but they needed allies to fight back against the powerful Empire. The time for hiding was over. It was time to take action. Lyra sat in the cockpit, her eyes focused on the stars ahead, while Ethan worked on reviewing the data they had gathered. His mind raced with everything he had learned so far, but the most pressing question still lingered in the back of his mind. Could they really defeat the Zorath? Could they truly stand against an empire that had crushed so many civilizations? He glanced up at Lyra, who was scanning the comms for any signs of incoming messages. She seemed calm, almost distant, but Ethan knew she was thinking about the same thing. The Zorath had already shown how ruthless they were. They weren't going to let their defeat at the supply hub slide. "We're almost there," Lyra said suddenly, breaking Ethan out of his thoughts. She turned to face him, her expression serious. "Are you ready?" Ethan took a deep breath and nodded. "As ready as I'll ever be." The base was located on a small moon orbiting a gas giant. It was well hidden, shielded from any long-range scans, and the perfect place for rebels to gather in secret. Lyra had explained that they needed to find a group of fighters willing to stand with them. But even with the data they had, convincing others would not be easy. The Zorath were feared throughout the galaxy, and most people were too afraid to take a stand. "Keep your guard up," Lyra warned as they descended toward the base. "Not everyone will be willing to help us. Some may even try to sell us out to the Zorath." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. He had never considered the possibility that they might encounter enemies among those they hoped to ally with. "How do we know who to trust?" Lyra's eyes hardened. "We don't. We trust our instincts, and we stay alert." The ship's descent was smooth, and soon they touched down on the moon's surface. The base was hidden inside a large rocky cave, with only a small entrance barely wide enough for their ship. Lyra expertly maneuvered the ship through the narrow passage, and soon they were inside. The base was more impressive than Ethan had imagined. It was a sprawling complex, with rows of ships, crates, and makeshift buildings. Rebel fighters were everywhere, moving with purpose and preparing for their next mission. Ethan could feel the tension in the air. These people were living on the edge, always looking over their shoulders, knowing that a single mistake could lead to their destruction. As they disembarked from the ship, a tall figure approached them. The man was dressed in rugged armor, his face hard and weathered. His eyes narrowed as he looked at Lyra. "Lyra," he said, his voice gruff. "I didn't think you'd be back. I thought you'd given up after everything." Lyra stood tall, unflinching. "I never gave up, and neither should you. Rourke, the Zorath are coming for us all. We need to fight back." Rourke studied her for a moment, then glanced at Ethan. "And who's this?" "This is Ethan," Lyra said, her voice steady. "He's the reason we're still alive. He's got information that could change everything." Rourke raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. Instead, he motioned for them to follow him. "Come with me. I'll take you to the leader. She's the one who decides what happens next." As they walked through the base, Ethan couldn't help but notice the tension in the air. Every person they passed seemed to be preparing for something, whether it was a fight, an escape, or something else. There was no peace here, only the constant buzz of preparation for war. He couldn't help but feel out of place. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't even sure if he was truly ready for what lay ahead. But Lyra had faith in him, and that gave him a small sense of hope. They'd reached the center of the base, where a large makeshift command room was set up. Inside, a woman was poring over maps and data, her brow furrowed in concentration. When she saw Rourke, she stood up, her eyes sharp and calculating. "Rourke, who's this?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. "This is Ethan," Rourke said, motioning toward him. "Lyra says he's important. We should listen." The woman's gaze shifted to Lyra, then back to Ethan. "You've brought us a stranger, Lyra. Why should we trust him?" Lyra stepped forward, her voice steady. "Ethan is the reason we're still alive. He's seen what the Zorath are planning. If we don't act now, it could be too late." The woman's expression softened, but only slightly. "And what exactly has he seen?" Ethan swallowed, feeling the weight of the situation. He had never been one for speeches, but now he needed to be clear. "I've seen the power the Zorath have. They control entire systems. But I also know they have weaknesses. If we can strike at their heart, we can bring them down." There was a long silence. Finally, the woman spoke. "If what you say is true, then we don't have much time. But I'm not going to make any promises. We'll need to meet with the other commanders and discuss this further." Lyra nodded. "I understand. But we don't have time to waste. The Zorath are already closing in." The woman looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "You're right. Get some rest. We'll have a council meeting in the morning." As Lyra and Ethan left the command room, Ethan couldn't help but feel a small sense of hope rising in him. It wasn't much, but it was a start. He wasn't alone anymore. He had allies, people who would fight with him, not against him.